let's talk about Legend of the Hero Kings by Ed Stark for the Birthright campaign setting for 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons. This is an adventure anthology. Before I go into that though, a kind of prologue about, well, Ed Stark, or not Ed Stark, don't know anything about him really, but if you actually read a lot of AD&D 2nd edition material from the dark days of the Rebellion, and really a lot of that counts for most people throughout the 2nd edition period, you know, adventure design in published format from 89 to 2000, there are a few interesting trends that come up. You have designers with real chops. You have Bruce Cordell, arguably the best or second best D&D adventure designer ever. You have who comes in 96, and his bizarre purple patches 96 to 98 or so. You have Ed Greenwood, who really did have designing chops, and the remaining dregs of what he had already written and designed come out in the 90s and are very interesting, and I want to get to more of those. You get some proper, generally speaking, just bad designers, people who might have a good adventure out there but are generally bad. Bluntly, Wolfgang Bauer, Skip Williams generally fall into that category. They're both senior members of staff. And then you get a big group of people in the middle who actually, by and large, there's some you get some other people who they released like one adventure and it wasn't very good. You get some decent journeymen. You get your Nigel Findleys, and then you get so in the middle category you get your bottom kind of the middle, Nigel Findley and people like that, solid, pedestrian, sometimes useful, and then you get a large group of quite promising designers who the format and the editing of the day don't help. And some of those are maybe slightly higher than just promising. Rich Baker had some real hits. For instance, Chris Perkins, controversial, but at his best there are some very good dungeon adventures by him, Dungeon Magazine. Ed Stark, like maybe Aaron Alston, Colin McComb and a few others, fall into the same category. Monty Cook, by the way, is a different discussion. But they fall into the same category of a lot of their stuff is interesting, but it suffers from all the problems of the day, and that's more or less this book. This is interesting. Ed Stark had also written the best adventure for Birthright, King of the Giant Downs. This is probably my second favourite. The other three, two are by Wolfgang Bauer, one is by Colin McComb. They're all much straighter adventures, more traditional adventures, with some attempts to work in the Birthright like domain play. You're a regent, you run stuff, you have a divine right over the land. But the only ones that really fully grasp the nettle of what Birthright is about are the two by Stark, King of the Giant Downs, who try and take over an area and become its regents, basically, by helping the locals. And Legends of the Hero Kings the gimmick is, over all but one of its chapters, over, I think there are 10, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 adventures, plus an appendix, which is about something different. But they are meant to be things you can use when random events come up, and a big thing in that's meant to generate tension, conflict, difficulty in Birthright is that when you're taking domain turns, there are random events. And there's a classic, I think Rich Baker and Colin McComb are the designers, classic 2-era cop-out that says, oh, you can just pick whatever you want, but hey, here's a table you could use as well. And here it's, well, what happens if an event comes on a table? Should you just resolve the mechanical effect? You lose a regency. If you've got to pass a test, you've got to do this. Or do you run an adventure out of it? And Legends of the Hero Kings is that. It is running adventures out of random events. And when you think about it, there's such a pure expression of earlier D&D in procedurally generated worlds, basically. The idea that the dice decide how the world interacts and reacts to you. This is a resource to help you do that, and so it is, in theory, great. It's absolutely what you need for Birthright. I think in practice, here's my headline. It is promising, often useful, but badly flawed, maybe inevitably. To go slightly more into that, I'll give a summary of strengths, summary of weaknesses that are just general ones, not adventure specific. And then I'll go through the adventures. Fairly briefly, probably, for the adventures themselves. We'll see how much I ramble. But strengths. The big strengths involve, one, the concept that you're trying to actually do stuff with your players' domains, rather than them being like, okay, either the domain play is very ancillary and it's just there and I do it because it's part of the game, and I really want to adventure, or if they're like, oh, I just want to adventure, this that attitude, or if they're like, I just want to min-max, do everything to do with my adventure, to do with my domain, D&D becoming secondary. And because there's meant to be this play-off and balance between the two, and this is meant to be the kind of the setting that supports domains, why don't you combine the two? That the things that you need to do as a regent are adventurers, D&D adventurers, and the two have a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle. And a thing that Stark talks about several times, and you get it in the original, in the core set as well, is how do you make these adventures things that regents need to deal with? That's the biggest question, is because you're like, well, yeah, there's some bandits, but I literally have an army. Okay, well, yeah, the tough bandits, I send my lieutenant. And you can have a thing where, and this is a perfectly common thing in second edition adventure design, the DM is meant to fudge it so players can't do anything interesting, they have to do something. There's some of that in here. But the basic point is fair. Actually, a way of avoiding that problem of fudging stuff to screw the players and force them to do stuff is to say, no, actually make it worthwhile. And this does that. This is it always attempts to, not always convincingly, give a reason why regents particularly are going to be the people who are going to have to deal with this. Second and third, because they're connected, there are real questions of branching and choice. So two things. One, most adventures, not all, because not all are appropriate for this, most adventures give a couple of different ways the players are likely to approach things. Are they going to bring an army, or are they going to go on their own with a few retainers? There's 4 adventurers and 3 retainers and stuff. One thing is that Birthright can run big adventures, big parties because of this, which again is actually, you can definitely see in an old school kind of context. So you've got this sense that the players might choose to do different things, and Stark does that regularly in basically every adventure, nearly. He also will, within that, often say the players might now want to do this or this. There's an actual attempt to work out what players do, and to often, nearly every time, not every time, respect that. So players are allowed to do different things, and this is how you might deal with it. It might not be successful, it might be a bad choice, but they can do that. That's fine. There's also pretty much, I think every adventure is quite good about saying, look, these are the 2 or 3 categories of success or failure. Do they completely resolve this in a way that they're likely to be happy with? Do they completely fail? Is there some sort of middle ground? What might constitute the middle ground? What are the results of that mechanically and politically? And though they're not always particularly interesting results, sometimes they definitely are, I think there's again something here which assumes that players can succeed or fail, that it's okay for players to fail, and that it can create more interesting situations afterward if they're trying to react to it. Again, definitely not what you have in the absolute worst second edition stuff, like the cutscene stuff, the straight railroads where you have your 8 encounters and you have to just do them, and then you get to the end and then you win. Or technically you lose, but like you have to go through all the rest, and essentially the game, people are here to turn up to play these encounters, and I guess loss is possible, but it's less fun than winning, and you need to get through them to get to the end to see the end of the story. That this doesn't do that, generally speaking. Those are some of the biggest things. There's also specific examples and particular adventures which I want to touch on in the adventures where they're just good. Some of these 11 adventures, probably the majority, are basically just quite good ideas, generally speaking, well thought through. A couple are bad, I think, but generally speaking, it's just a good collection. You could get a lot of ideas from it. The biggest flaw, there's a caveat flaw to the strengths I've given, but the biggest flaw is just, and this is the most obvious second edition thing, it's so horrendously overwritten. This is 160 pages, and either it could be half the length, or, and I'm happy with this, some people would much rather have much shorter booklets. That can be useful for ease of play. You've got to get through a lot more pages here compared to 16. Some people prefer that. I think that's legitimate, but I'm thinking, so you had this many words, you had this many pages, couldn't you have written something better? Basically, if you're saying, well, you could halve it or cut it by a third, why not spend all the extra words on other good stuff? And it is a problem, it's something that torments me when reading second edition stuff, is the opportunity cost. Not so much the whole, there is an issue, obviously playability is a real issue, but mostly I'm just like, why not give me something more? Give me more stuff. I talked about this, I think, in King of the Giant Downs, where there's a real sense at points that you're just like, this is wittering. Some of that's paper word, but I think it's also editorial standards, the assumption that more expansive and chatty is probably better for people to read. You get it when you read old reviews from Dragon or Polyhedron or White, not so much White Dwarf by this point, but Arcane, places like that, and you've got people like, oh, this is really clean styling. They're like, not this particularly, but you're looking at a book, they're talking about an 80 or 120 page book that should probably be about 60 pages. You know, it's crazy. They think that's clean. So yeah, it also has usability problems that you're trying to find stuff out, and the chattiness means that, yes, if you read an adventure you're running 3 times and internalize it, this will be much less of a problem. I'm not a purist on this, but I think it's worth just saying that, yes, of course you can bypass it. The problem is that I would say that as you're reading it, that there's just long explanations of stuff. Even simple things are often very lengthy, over-descriptive. If the heroes make camp on the first night, they just ready themselves for sleep when a wide-eyed woman with long grey hair bursts into the camp. She wears fine clothes, now torn and soiled, and her hair bears the remnants of braids and ribbons. She has a look of madness about her. Box text. My boy, she screams. He was with me and now he's been taken. The shadow has him. The shadow. Her eyes roll up in her head and she collapses. If the PCs examine the woman, they see she's either of noble birth or the trusted servant of a noble family. The ribbons, what's left of them in her hair, are silk, and her fingers covered in grime still wear gold and jewelled rings. She wears on her back a makeshift pack, constructed of an old war pennant. Inside the pack, a piece of bread and a small wineskin filled with water await their owner's need. The woman requires first aid, food and rest, but the PCs might want to awaken her immediately to determine the cause of her raving. If they do, she screams incoherently and passes out again. Only a heal, limited wish, or wish spell can restore her to senses before morning. Of course, the PCs might try instead to follow her tracks whence she came. She seemed to be running from something. You don't need to be a professional line editor or copy editor to get that if you're trying to communicate the information in that. In terms of technical writing, you could condense that down, particularly, even leaving the box text, which has a relevance here. It's meant to be how the PCs meet this woman who gives them a kind of sub-quest. But the point is that you could just put most of that's exactly where the sometimes overused, sometimes limiting bullet point formatting and stuff OSC uses, for instance. You could use that there to get most of that across in much less than half a column. Over half a column. It's very long. This is everywhere. This is all over the place. There's no point in boring you with more examples. You're going to have to highlight stuff. Sometimes it actively affects usability in relation to another thing, which is that there's basically no summaries of information. So because you're trying to find stuff in text and the text is too long and there's no summaries, it's a problem. Another issue, so yeah, there's that. A caveat to me saying that there's choices is that often there is a kind of, there's strong leads on something. Sometimes there are, and I'll touch on this in some adventures possibly, we'll see. You're told, just do this. And there's no point actually calling these out. In basically every adventure, there's some point where you're told, just, if you don't want this to happen, don't let it. Oh, if you think, there's one example of this specifically that I can think of. If the PCs are getting bored, throw some soldiers, so enemies at them and they can fight them. This is indicative to me, not of a guy who doesn't know D&D or doesn't know how to run a fun game. One suspects he does. You know, there's a sense that these are real games and these were interesting games. There is a long list of playtesters in the front, including by Rich Baker and Roger Moore. But how much of it was in campaign format, how much of it also was based on players being told, just do what you want, work out what to do in this world. And Birthright does intentionally really open itself up to be a sandbox. It's meant to be, because of the domain play. Anyway, that's a second significant criticism, is that of course there are literally, you know, a score of times you're told to break the game to stop PCs ruining it. And I think really sometimes, by the way, those aren't even completely wrong. There can be things like they can just be phrased wrong, or they could be in a different situation to say these are the circumstances and situations that are going to likely to limit the PCs doing this, is that they, rather than having them be diegetic and clearly diegetic, they are inside the world. They're presented as outside the world reasons why you're just going to do it, because in the end you're there to make it a good time, and that's good enough reason for you to kind of stop PCs doing something. So yeah, that's kind of what one species is, even when they are reasonable reasons to limit players or direct players in a particular way because of the circumstances. They're presented badly. Thirdly, the cartography is by David C. Sutherland, and it is basically bad, and shockingly for a great artist. There's these weird, I mean, maybe they're not the worst thing, but there's these weird kind of top-down things. There's the ogre and the ogre's elite warriors in a completely needless map functionally. It explains a couple of things for an ambush site, but it itself is not necessarily even the most necessary map. Another, it's a tunnel, and again there's these weird top-down figures. The worst of these maps, I don't even want to say, I mean, I kind of want to make myself like them, because I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun. Some of them are okay, that's kind of okay, but yeah, let's get to this one. It's in the penultimate one, I think, the penultimate adventure, the Fang of Cretia. There's these floor maps, but what they are is there's art, and then there's a superimposed set of walls, but the walls are going over the art, which is sometimes therefore in different rooms. And I don't know, I sort of assume, I don't know, I don't know, did he impose the lines? Did they impose the lines? I don't get it. Like, it just means sometimes you're not sure what's in what room. It's genuinely, it's just, that, the actual map there, by the way, is fine. It's the superimposition. There's also like the weird, quite Sutherlandish, to be fair, adventurer who doesn't really fit tonally, but I mean, I can give that a pass because it's Sutherland. The interior art in general is not particularly great. The cover is Tony Skudlow. Is it Tony Skudlow? Yeah, who is the Birthright artist in the way that D. Tennessee is the Planescape artist, and Brom and Easley are the Spelljammer artists, you know. So yeah, it's there's some issues like that. I mean, that's pretty minor because never is it mission critical, but it definitely, in that one case where there are maps that you need to understand for a stealth infiltration mission, it's kind of annoying that you've got to parse the maps that second extra. Anyway, you can probably see why I'm saying this is promising but flawed, because you're like, okay, so really great ideas, really attempting to open this up to player decision, but you've just got to do a lot of work to make it work because they just didn't know how to edit stuff. And you even get that with Cordell's adventures. The caveat, the kind of counter to that is that at least most of the time he could write. Basically, the thing is, it's overwritten, it needs a trim, but he can write, and that means it basically works. Rich Baker, somewhat similar. Monty Cook at his best, similar. You can just get the fact that this is creative. People like Ed Stark or Aaron Alston or Rick Swan were not, like, I don't know, they were not Hugo winners in their own right, and I think it means that you're running into dry blocks of text that need cutting down. So here's some stuff about the way to use it, including about timing things. The idea is that this is legends in the future told by Karlbrech, the Bard, Karlbrech the Wanderer, about the days of the heroes. That's just a framing device. It gives a list of it gives the random events table with the legends associated with it here. That's, sorry, the focus is shocking there. That's not that much better. Yeah, so the idea is when you're rolling a random event, you then say, ooh, so corruption/crime, Heroes Pride, maybe I could do that one. Or intrigue, double dealing, gathering of heroes, Heroes Pride. Oh, magical event, the gift of Azrai, terrible awakening. You get the idea. It's that you roll an event, you check to see if you can use an adventure. One of the things that should inspire the Birthright DM to do, and I bet everyone with a long-running Birthright campaign does do this, is you roll a random event and you then write something yourself that requires attention. This should inspire you, and it says in the start and the end, this is meant to help you do this yourself. Think about the kinds of ways adventures can fit events rather than just see them as a mechanical function of the game. You know, oh well, we have to resolve this. So the adventures are Blood Hungry, Double Dealing, Gathering of Heroes, Heroes' Pride, Terrible Awakening, The Horns of Journey, Dwarven Steel, Time of Troubles, Poor Relations, Fang of Krisha, and The Gift of Azrai. They cover low to high mid levels. There's no absolute, I don't think there's any truly high level stuff in here. So little, of course, in general is there in the whole of the AD&D canon. But Blood Hungry is either Blood Challenge or Assassination. And the idea is that a seemingly loyal retainer or lieutenant, it has been there's an attempt on their life, and it basically turns out they've been driven mad in the particular way, and have staged this and are trying to get an opportunity to commit blood theft upon the hero, the regent, to take their power and to gain it for themselves. And there's this idea that, yeah, so it says, you know, you need to have this retainer, you need to have introduced them previously. This is fine, by the way, but this is not kind of weird railroading to introduce characters who have particular interests, which later you'll turn into an adventure. The trick here is actually that you need to, well, a downside here is you need to have read this book and have put all the potential pieces on the board to use the adventures, potentially. Which is fine, but you know, it certainly says something about, it's a campaign. You need to have, I don't know, there needs to be an integration into the campaign world which is not automatic, and therefore it makes it a weird book in that sense. And that is, again, regular. There should be some trust. The PC and NPC must have some occasion for interaction so trust can develop. We then hear Orlis, we get his stats, and it turns out he's born into poverty, but his mother says you should, you know, take her secret treasure to his father, make himself known, and it's basically a bloodline stealing dagger, Blood Hunger. He would get his birthright back. It's a dagger +3 with intelligence of 13, empathic capabilities, ego of 10, and chaotic evil. It wants to take the victim's bloodline, passing half it to its wielder and consuming half itself. So it drives the wielder mad, so it will go out and feed it. And it becomes a dagger +6 for a number of days, equal to the amount of bloodline strength points it absorbs. This one is this is one of the weaker ones, I think. It's an interesting idea. I think the idea that you have a retainer, that retainer is useful and good, and then you corrupt them, you kind of create a complication via them coming into contact with, one way or another, with this kind of accursed artifact, is interesting. Because in Birthright you should be dealing with this network of NPCs, and if you're regents of NPCs in the court, and a way that can be diegetic, and therefore the way you should approach it is more or less the background here. It's an heirloom, it's not forced on them. The other option is you have an enemy of the PCs who's therefore got their own agency doing it and creating a problem for them, and that's another way in which the world gets to do it, rather than you say to the PCs, by the way, you need to go on this adventure. This, though, largely ends up being about, there's this assassination attempt, the heroes rush in to fight the assassins, Orlis is wounded, but the assassin has also been poisoned by Orlis, and they then hear from Orlis and the assassin, and their stories clash. The hero is going to investigate, and then you kind of get some stuff which is sort of meant to be about, well, if this happens, then do this. But because this one very much leads to, there's a particular couple of things that should end up happening, and it doesn't really matter what the heroes do to some degree. Either Orlis proceeds quickly or slowly, depending on what the heroes know. Orlis spreads rumours that the PCs were behind the assassination, and then he disappears. And he fakes a kidnapping. It does say if something goes wrong, if the heroes, through ingenuity or pure brute strength, manage to stop the kidnappers from escaping with Orlis, the retainer has a backup plan. He does not want to use it, as it lacks the elegance of his primary plot, but he will if necessary. He resigns. So yeah, here Stark is good enough to recognise that you need to let the PCs do stuff. They might win, but it needs to not really matter. That's why this is weak, is that even though it is better than many second edition adventures for not demanding the PCs win or lose, it still forces them to follow the plot. He goes off to a hideout, they go and confront him, and he plans for some contingencies, and then there's an end. He's got a female wizard of mixed Canarsie and Ainarayan descent with her own grudge against the heroes, or just a severe case of greed, you can decide which, and you're told what happens. It's basically just not terribly exciting, is it, if we're honest? I would say I don't read that and think the idea, I think the start is good, and the idea that there might be a plot where the PCs can find out more or less is good, but you need to cut out the end. You need to be able to branch it so that what happens if they just something that Stark does a couple times is, well, make it clear the PCs can't do this or it'll be unpopular, which is relevant. It's a diegetic reason, but sometimes it seems cheap, and in this case you're just like, well, if you think the guy's acting weird, why not, like, I don't know, do something to him? You don't need to kill him, just do something so you can find out what's going on. Why don't you, I mean, if the weapon is functioning at cursed, can you remove curse on him to make him drop the dagger? What's going on? If you think he's insane, can you cast heal on him? Because it's corrupted him. It's something which I don't think it's a cursed weapon technically, but you should be able to resolve it another way than, well, even if the PCs win every time, you've got to eventually go to the fight, the confrontation at the hideout. Double dealing. It does not. Regency doesn't confer honesty, nobility, or a sense of responsibility upon a ruler. And there's a new ruler has seized power in a nearby realm, and he causes quite a stir. And he invites many of the surrounding regents and notables to the area, to kind of a party or whatever. And his real motive is blood theft on a wealthy guildmaster and ally of the PCs. The heroes become embroiled in this. So you have to set the stage in the previous domain turn where a new ruler turns up, who's at 10th level. Loads of the bad guys in this are Voss for some reason. One big thing is the assumption is that it says, oh, well, you can put it anywhere in the world. But really, a lot of these adventures, they're all written, nearly all of them are written to be set in Ainuri, in the southwest Arthurian legends area of the world, of the main continent. And I think a lot of them suit that better, or maybe the more urban parts of Brector, maybe southwest Uric, some parts of the Canarsie lands, but other parts don't. So if you're set in the Voss lands, if you're set in north central Uric, if you're set in some of the fringier parts of Brecht, a lot of these which rely heavily on the very well developed, quite connected land that in Ainuri just won't work as well. That's a by the by. I think, just take this for what it's worth, a bunch of adventures, but certainly they'll be harder to adapt to some areas than others. He's got a doppelganger who's going to, I think, he's going to replace the guildmaster or something, and you're invited. There's a party. There is potentially you can meet the wizard who's helping Volstead, or you meet his brother who's his steward, and there's lots of entertainments. You can meet people. There's the doppelganger who basically is a bit rogue. That's a fun detail, I think. The plot takes shape, and there's an attempt to abduct the guildmaster, and then the trap is sprung. That's one thing, again, you need to set up an ally, or you need to pick a PC, and Stark does mention that possibility, but you need to have built up an ally who could be blood thefted in this kind of circumstance. Again, the idea that Volstead would be like a bit of a nutter and just be like, yeah, I just want to start blood thieving from neighbouring regents, not unlikely in the circumstances. There must be people like that. There's then an illusionary attack run by the wizard, while down below there is an evil Voss priest, or priestess of Cretia, who is trying to sort out the blood theft, and then you go down and fight. And there's questions about experience, by the way, and every adventure gives experience possibilities. Quite a good thing, in a sense, is that it says, oh, well, the players might succeed more or less in this way, but of course it's not designed for the core game of D&D, which is this game of exploration. It's story XP, and therefore some of the XP listings are actually quite subtle and clever, and they're just about usable if you really want to. I won't if I use them in a Birthright campaign, but I think they are they're basically, it's because this isn't being designed around the idea that you measure difficulty with gold, which is what gold for XP is about. They're here so that if you've done the story well, you get points. So yeah, that one and double dealing is okay. It gets a strut of Birthright, I think, to say you have a social event with lots of moving cogs. It's not as deep or clever as some of the other ones in the book even, but it gets the idea that that's the sort of thing you can have happen in the course of diplomacy, and have an adventure out of that is a good idea. Gathering of Heroes is a better version of the same. It's festival or diplomatic matter or intrigue. Basically, you are invited to, you're either hosting or invited, depending on who the PCs are, to a festival, and then there's a bunch of PCs. There's 4 nobles, 2 courtiers, and 2 commoners, it says, turn up. So you've got 8 NPCs, and there's a lot of stuff. Basically, this is one of the stronger ones in one angle, one direction that Birthright goes, which is that it sets up, there's a tournament, there's different games, there's the joust, there's the fencing match, there's storytelling and options for other games, and those 3, by the way, have who will participate, how they'll participate, what the prize is, and XP out of it, which, by the way, I'm fine with. That's not story XP. If you're saying, if you participate this and you get some XP, if you win you get more XP, there's a risk-reward thing there. It's understandable and optional as to why you'd go in doing that. It's not the same thing as having to follow the plot to the end to get the XP. There is a plot, however, which is on the part of a guy who is nicknamed the Vizier, Bowden Stormwatcher, 9th level Anorean wizard, quite powerful then in the context of Birthright. Grand Vizier, who is working with Princess Kalila Shaddam, the Kinasi wizard thief, and they want to embarrass the heroes. A neighbouring region has decided to embarrass the heroes, and so this starts with this. The welcoming feast is ruined. There's spoiling of a course. The game's disrupted by protests. Petty theft is rampant. This is kind of sillier because it just feels like annoying rather than anything. But the reaction, you need to work out, you can prevent it through being alert. Check tent ropes, saddle hitches, open windows. If you can stop the embarrassing occurrences and investigate, they'll probably be able to question enough knowledgeable peasants to find the originator of the plot. So yeah, that's a neighbouring rival. There's questions about rewards and penalties for that. Again, somewhat pressing the boundaries of the D&D form. But then there's a further intrigue, which is that Maria Nikosdottir, this annoying, difficult Voss, who might actually be able to be tempted from lawful evil to lawful neutral, could become a useful neighbour in the north. But Bowden Stormwatcher and Kalila Shaddam want to humiliate her, and the plan involves trying to kind of fit her up for being, doing stuff that she shouldn't be doing. And there are some instructions about the idea that the heroes might want to find out about this. It does, however, this is one of the strengths of the adventure end of the book, is like, well, what happens if you're actually helping Shaddam, I think it's clearly Shaddam, gets you involved in helping her? It's only a throwaway line, but you're like, okay, so I could just help the other side. There are different things that could come out of that. There are other things where they're like, oh, use these NPCs in the future. The Knight of the Blemished Shield, who's a very heroic and impressive 6th level paladin, Anorian paladin of Halen with a great bloodline, Andurus himself. There's a lot of good stuff in that as a social adventure with things you get to do that might involve fighting. It needs a bit more space to breathe, and that makes you think about the word count issue. Cut some of the extraneous stuff, add more details for the social adventure. Hero's Pride is factions arising in court. And it does say this adventure may seem very unusual to most DMs and players because there's not much armed conflict. And the conclusion forces the PCs to formulate a solution of their own. Dreadful news. It's interesting, by the way, that it's recognised that you've got to explain, hey, look, this is a model for how you might have court intrigue and rivalry. That isn't really that anyone hates the PC, it's that they hate each other, or at least they want to do down each other. So there's civilian administrators and the military command, and there's sample names and units and so on for all that. But the idea that you're trying to negotiate these problems because you don't really want to punish people, especially when there's no one's super malicious. The idea that one is peaceful and two, the PCs need to come up with a solution of their own. This is not even that strong, but it's a solid adventure, and it introduces a concept which must be very alien if you've only read proper Forgotten Realms shovelware of the era. So yeah, praise for that. It does say, use your own if you want to. There's some stuff that the commander in the army says, oh, I've trained some knights up or something, and it basically means you can improve a unit. That's good. The players are going to like it. This is clever. The players want this to happen. But then kind of the head of your economic office, your chief tax master, has found out a way to raise income. So that's great. Because temporarily, it's like a windfall tax function, like a way of closing loopholes. And for a season, for a turn, 3 months, you'll get extra income without any penalty to popularity. And then they'll find new loopholes. But that's fine, it's good. But then they get more and more annoyed, and there's a thing where basically each side start giving you gifts, and they start saying, oh, well, why don't you do this? So, for instance, the economic people give you a book which will give you bonuses to skill checks. The military people give you a lovely sword which you could sell if you wanted. And then it escalates again. So this is actually something which works much better, not as an event where you want to, oh, I'll now do this for the next domain turn, but that over the course of a year, you piece these things out and you just have this bubbling, and the players may not even realise that these things could be connected. They might just think, this is just because I'm being a regent and these are the things that happen. There is then an attempt to frame the army for embezzlement. And then there is an attack on tax collectors, and some stuff about that and things that can happen. The way it could escalate and stuff coming out of it. Maybe the criticism here, I say it's not one of the best adventures here. It's solid, but really that it really is a side trek or random event. It's something which should just play out in the background, and then you have to resolve with your own solutions. And it gives some examples of solutions, but it's not really an adventure. Terrible Awakening is due to earthquakes, some weird monsters popped up. It is called it's that Azrai had made a proto Ornche called the Doom, the Gloom, and that's the Dread. I feel like I'm playing Gloomhaven here, and then imprisoned him before Mount Dicemar, the big apocalyptic event that really frames the setting. Azrai being the evil god. And so great, that's the story. The Dread has been active again. It then says, well, there's these problems happening, people are running away, there's more undead, and so you should go and deal with it. And then it says you might want to do this or this, these are the options. It says the rest of this adventure has been written to take into account both possibilities. Isn't that such an amazing idea that someone might actually consider doing that? You then have, at that point, there is linearity after this. You do things in order till you get to the place where you'll eventually fight the Dread. You meet this woman, who I've already read the over-lengthy passage from, but then you go and you find out that the child is in the pit, but actually the child who you think's talking to you is a shadow creature who wants to possess you, possessing the child's body. You can get rid of it. You don't really want to kill the boy, because then the shadow just loses its host. But you could do something else and you could save the boy. That's a good encounter. If you wait too long, the boy's dead. The shadow creature's there waiting for you, but the boy's dead. Then you go and you've got an army, and you've got to convince your army to follow you with a charisma check. Not a very exciting way of doing it, but it's attempting to handle the idea you might do this. There's a purple worm, which is it will eventually leave if it eats 4 people, but yeah. There's a fairly fun thing going on there. I think there's just like, here's a mad creature. This one I think probably is one of the high level ones from memory. 9th to 12th, this is the highest. And to be fair, when you're hitting up at 12th, you could see 9th being the minimum where you're going to start fighting purple worms, and the monster is more up there. The others I think are all pretty flexible, frankly, from memory. I think a lot of the rest are just kind of like, oh well, you could adapt this from mid to high. It is nearly always what it says. It says the PCs can be of any level in Heroes Pride. It says in the Gathering of Heroes. What does it say? Levels don't matter though. Low to mid-level heroes might like to do this because it's, you know, a nice one for them to do. And double dealing is any character class. Newly invested regents are good for it. So basically, yeah, again, doesn't matter for level too much, and I think it's fairly similar for the first one as well. Many of these, there is some flexibility about that, and that's a weakness sometimes because it fits the vagueness of some of the things you then go and do. Blood hungry, high level heroes might need more stuff to do, you're told. If you've got an army, you have to fight the army of the dead. If you you don't have to fight an army of the dead, you have to do something else to get around them. And then you have to come and fight the dread. You have a skirmish basically, and then you come to the Shadow Lake itself, where the dread has woken up, and you fight this quite powerful creature, which is just going to be a big battle basically, and that's fine. It gives things about you could do this or this to defeat it. Continuing the adventure, it does say if the dread manages to escape and eventually return for revenge, probably at the head of an army, what other horrors from Severia's past may lie imprisoned in the earth, the heroes might do best to leave them there for now. One possibility for continuing the adventure lies at the bottom of the Shadow Lake. What is the third chest of the dread? And they'll give some suggestions. Again, a big bad might beat you. That's good. Horns of Droney, a minor Ornshade has risen. He has a sort of dumb plan. I don't want to talk about it. It has an ugly map. I've already shown you the ugly map. It's got some contingencies. What will happen if this and this happens? So there's basically good adventure design practice there, but the adventure itself is just this guy wants to take over some land and has a not very good plan for it. Dwarven Steel is low to mid-level adventurers, 2nd to 6th work best. And basically here, the previously fairly isolated good Dwarven Kingdom, Barakajik, wants to make friends, and you're picked presumably as regents, you know, that you could become friends, but as a way of proving your goodness, I guess, to the more skeptical advisors of the Overthane, you need to go and, well, you're told just go and fight some Orogs in the tunnels, but really the plan is the good dwarves know there is a embassy ongoing between bad dwarves from Merkilad and the Orogs, and you need to go and disrupt it. And if you disrupt it, there'll be great rewards. This is a strong, a sign that Stark does actually think it matters that this is adaptable. He even says, oh well, if you're the Overthane of Barakajik, there is a player secret book for Barakajik, it's okay, is that you need to handle the same problem yourself, and these are the kind of conditions. It's less interesting if that's the case, but there we are. It's fairly bloated and overwritten before you get to, you know, you're taking 4 pages to get to being told what the mission itself is. You've got a contact before that with a scene, I guess. There's then a thing where you're given various tips via the skeptical advisors as you plan. You are told that it says, to obtain these tips, the PCs must patiently listen to the long-winded advisors or ask the right questions. There is a social element there. You want that expanded. You want rumours and possibilities and information all over the place. And there's something more interesting in that if the PCs have to be more proactive, probably. As it is, it's just a scene where it's like been playing Broken Sword again recently, and it's just like when you're clicking through items with an NPC just so you can find out what's going on. And it's fun, pleasant to hear the dialogue, but you know, it's not itself thrilling. Then there is some stuff about going into the darkness, and you might be a dwarven thief might come with you. It then gives some interesting stuff about encounters. For instance, at any time when you're walking or crawling single file, A 1 in 6 chance exists that rats, spiders, or both attack. So basically, it should say once an hour. We've lost so much by this point of an understanding of random encounters that a good random encounter written by a guy in an interesting adventure is like, well, there's always a chance. Well, what, every second you should roll a die? Yeah. 6 to 12 giant rats who are larger than their normal friends, and large spiders who have onset poison, 15 damage. They may even accidentally work together because of the circumstances. Even for a 5th level party, that could be a challenging encounter due to the circumstances. You've got a good note about, like, players with 200 weapons may be advised to take something simpler because they won't be able to swing it. You know, it's clever. There's Orog spike traps and ways... This is a brilliant thing, by the way. It says, oh, you can trigger it just by touching it with a pole or a spear or something, or a thief can use remove traps on it. You know, with this kind of... I don't think there may be a penalty or a bonus to it, I forget. There's particular rules about how you'll be able to dodge it or not. It's actually it does, however, I should say, take nearly a page to describe this trap with all the rules. Again, where's the bullet points? And then there's 2 maps and a stone carving. But there's 2 maps to do with this war den, where you go and fight, and then you go and fight the kind of place where these Orog outriders who are thinking about attacking Barakajik so their leader can become more an Orog king, are meeting with people from Merkelad, and it kind of assumes you're going to sneak in. It thinks, well, you could fight your way in, or you could sneak in and kill the guards at the top. It then says, you know, then it's going to get harder to fake it, which is fine, and they're going to have to get creative. And you think, do you know what? The fact you're being told, no, there's like 50 Orogs here, and you really want to... Your real success comes from taking out the Merkelad dwarves as well, not just the Orog leader. That's a challenging thing, because you think, well, it's a good thing, because it's saying to the players, you need to be clever enough to work out how to win the situation, even though there's like 4 of you, an NPC, and maybe a couple of retainers. You're not going to be able to win a straight-up fight, probably, so what do you do? That's clever. A criticism of the text is that Stark doesn't give you many clues on what the situation. There's not as much information, because information is the currency in D&D, and so you as the DM have to have the bank, which is what should come in the book. That's a problem here. I think that you are expected to do that work. Trade, and then there's lots of experience stuff about what all the good things that can happen based on winning, but also stuff that can happen on losing. Mostly they just ask you to leave. But yeah, you could set up a new trade route. You could swap army units, and your units will come back better from the swap each time because there'll have been tunnel fighting. So it's the upsides are framed in terms of domain play, and they're good and clever. Time of troubles is there are cutthroats are loose, and there's an interesting thing where you might come across there's the potential battle that you could fight against an army of the rebels, and it gives what happens if you win or lose. If you lose, you might have to flee back to your castle. If you're taking a personal interest and you're taking an adventuring party, you could come across a village, and this is sort of, there's a railroad here because it says, well, hey, this is just the thing you might come across, but of course it's not an organic part of the map. Take or leave it, but we all understand, I think, as DMs, that there are things where, as you're designing on the fly, you end up plopping stuff that fits. You know, you don't have everything written down in such detail beforehand. You do develop on the fly, and this, you can see this adventure is at some level assuming, well, when you do that, the way you'll do it is to make this adventure happen like this. I think you can use this encounter, basically, is what I'm saying. You know, you just have to understand that it needs to fit into a more coherent world than one that just has stuff plopped down. If it's an existing village, for instance, that's better. You find cutthroats attacking a village, and there is one fighter and a bunch of people holed up in a farmhouse, and they're trying to defend it from the cutthroats. And it gives you multiple different approaches to what happens if the PCs do this to try to get rid of the cutthroats. The cutthroats, by the way, are the enemy elite, and they're like level 4 fighters. They're quite tough, really. This does, what does it say about the heroes? low to mid-level again, though 1 or 2 high-level adventurers might find it a challenge because they've got them and a couple of retainers who are lower level probably. You then, again, you have stuff about whether or not you have an army or you're on your own. You have stuff that's going to happen as you go, and this is good, but again, you could just use more of the words that have been wasted to fill in this. Oh, you go around, you've got to help heal people. You could win hearts and minds by healing people, by dealing with problems. You could skirmish with foragers from the enemy army who are out there. You know, things can happen as you try to find where the enemy is based. And the enemy is Sidira Jami Hapifair, Kanasi fighter wizard. And she has come here to try to, she's whipped up the populace and created an army of bandits, and she's trying to take over. And the resolution is, ultimate victory, partial victory, and defeat. That's a good way, again, that he tries to break it up. Like, you could get some of your objectives, but not others. Obviously, defeat means you're going to lose control of the province. So using a random event to actually bring about world changes, that's good. Poor relations. There is a nephew of an advisor or a member of your family or whatever. Again, multiple cases are assumed, but is written with one assumption in mind, and then you're told, just change it, obviously, if you need to. Has been falsely accused by the default is the Baron of Gueri, who's like a big, potentially evil ruler in Anure, quite a dangerous guy. He's been accused. He's been arrested for a double murder, and the Baron has said, look, if you want to come along and find out what's going on, please do. You can take an embassy there, you can sneak there. You're told the different things you could do. You'll find out evidence. You might be, if you're there on an embassy, be able to talk to the Baron of Gueri and find out, have the suspicion that he's sort of not really that sympathetic and he's quite happy to have this humiliate you. Or you can, and you'll also see, more easily see the guy who's been accused, who it turns out is innocent. You investigate, he's innocent. You have to deal with the different characters. Again, most of these characters are most of a page each, and that's probably too much for this, in this case. Not because you don't need information about them, but because you've got to memorize all that stuff. This is the adventure where it has the fighters option in between those two stars, diamonds. If the players are itching for combat, throw in an encounter. Then you could find out more. You find out that, what really happened, and then it gives options about how it might conclude. Via spies, the secret witness, the bodies. You might be able to prove his innocence in one way or another. And it gives suggestions. This isn't itself the worst use of experience if you're doing story XP. Give them XP for finding clues. The problem there is still you're assuming that the end result for them succeeding by their own standards is that they do your adventure and do the solution that you want them to. But yeah, it's decent. It basically continues to not have very much detail about everything. It doesn't. There's a potential jailbreak you could do. No details about what the jailbreak is. Just says, oh, he's in this kind of room in the tower. No details about the tower or the guards or anything else, other than that you might be able to get an insider to help you. Yeah, that's a criticism again, that the expansiveness means that there's not focus on the stuff you want to use at the table. Fang of Krisha, our penultimate one, is 4 to 6 mid to low level. This is one of the two biggest ones. The two final ones are the biggest ones in terms of page count. The Time of Troubles, I think, or is it Dwarven Steel? Dwarven Steel, I think, is the third longest at 18, and that's pretty good. The longest ones actually tend to be the better ones generally. Dwarven Steel just has the issue that it, again, doesn't quite fit the resources you need as a DM to the sheer length. Fang of Krisha, there is a Voss. Again, it's a Voss, War Priest of Belinik, who's turned up with an artifact of Krisha, the other evil Voss deity, and is causing a peasants' revolt by going around doing good stuff and training peasants to fight. There's a really interesting subtext here where you're told, look, as rulers, you're going to be scared by all these peasants fighting and being trained to fight. And this, it doesn't say, and this should make you deconstruct your views, nor does it say it shouldn't. It just raises it like, hey, these peasants are learning to defend themselves. That's dangerous in some ways, isn't it? How are you going to deal with that? How are you going to deal with their problems? And it has some clever stuff, albeit within the format of like what XP you'll win or lose and stuff, but also in terms of real diegetic effects. Like, as you're trying to find where this guy Herthang, you might have heard of as causing trouble, he says, oh no, we shouldn't have a revolt, but eventually there'll have to be a revolt because they're going to attack us. We're innocents, you know. He's not actually preaching sedition, but he is. Using his magical artifact to do great works. You're then attacked by brigands. Rather, you see an attack by brigands, you can interfere or not, then a Voss war priest and some peasants turn up to fight them. And this is all a staged event. There's a few staged events in this book. The brigands are being paid by the war priests, much like in the first one, the assassin and the kidnappers are. But yeah, the interesting thing here is the peasants are basically mostly pretty innocent people. They're defending their home. They're fighting brigands. They've been trained by the war priest to do this. If you just kill them all, your reputation is going to crash. That's good. That's clever. It gives clues, and it gives a list of clues for the clever. Like if you detect alignment, you'll know that Victor, this war priest, the junior one, is lawful evil. You'll notice that some of the people are acting charmed. The peasants are peasants, but they're fighting well. You might be able to find out from the brigands that they were paid to do this, that they thought this was a put-up themselves. You then have a list of rumours on this page about the different subjects. You see those different paragraphs with bullet points. Works the War Priest, Herthang the Cold, Templar Belenik, Fang of Cretia. And then you've got three people who you might throw in people who are unconvinced by the stories about the goodness and kindness of Herthang and his War Priests. There's loads of stuff here for what's going to be set up, and a big point is this is meant to be more of an infiltration, careful thing, because you don't want to alienate the peasants, you don't want a high body count, you want to expose this guy as a fraud if you can, and that is, you can, because it turns out the Fang is usable not just by him, but by anyone. The weakness here, obviously, is that you could imagine another scenario where he had a real artifact from Belenik, which only he could use. Well, you're not going to expose him as a fraud, are you? It's assuming an end to the scenario. But the general idea that you will get better results out of being careful rather than just burning everything to the ground because then people will hate you, that's good. That should be the case. It teaches regents that they need, it's a situation where regents can prove that they know how to play the game, basically do it properly. Herthang has turned up. It gives information about the Fang and stuff about him. The portraits aren't as fun in this as they are in some books, but they're okay. Then we have the dreadful maps of the Temple of Belenik, and then we have a key. The key is not too bad, really. I mean, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 rooms on a page plus, and that's excluding, but plus a description of the whole building. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One thing is when I'm saying these rooms, partly some of these rooms are quite large and complex with many different sub areas which they're treating as rooms. If you want to count it that way, in that case the rooms are quite heavily detailed. It's not as bad as the storage closet taking up a quarter of a page. None of it is that bad. It's somewhere in between good and bad. It's mediocre. You get more details. You get some clever stuff, like there is, you might find in the armory, if you find the armory in the cellar, that there are wine casks, but one is a pine cask rather than oak. It doesn't look like the rest, it looks newer, and this is actually secret, and it has a trigger mechanism which is quite clever, and there's a bunch of magic stuff in it, including curse stuff, and yeah, and you're trying to infiltrate this place to find evidence that maybe, and I think this will be where we're getting to in a second, details about Herthang's private quarters, stuff about subtle and complete success might be that you prove the war priests use blood sacrifice, that you unearth the bodies of the innkeeper and family, and the base reward is if you expose them as frauds. You'd lose points in this case for killing guards, war priests, Herthang. Not so subtle but complete, there's a lower cap, which is that you defeat Herthang and co. You get bonuses for certain things, you get negatives for certain, and failure, again, involves, again, you lose control and power in the area, people start to hate you. That's good. There's also a thing where there's information about, okay, well, the priest might be here or here, they'll be patrolling like this, they'll react like this in this situation. Good details, but it's spread throughout the text, and the text is long, if not insanely long. That's a problem, basically. It needs to be shorter, and it needs summary pages. Finally, the Gift of Azrai, the final adventure, is basically, this is a big one. This is a meta plot event essentially, and it's fairly linear. That's a big weakness of it, but it's a basically very fun idea. It's a Broodmother Sky Fortress idea that there's a plague set by an enemy of some kind. You decide. The Gift of Azrai, and if unchecked, we hear at the end it will kill a third of the population of Cerealia, and you could reasonably adjudicate it as every PC and every one of their major NPC allies should roll versus death to survive. So you can ruin the world in a good way. But it's also connecting to the lost people, the Messetians, one of the 5 kindreds, and saying, okay, but you need to go and find a true Messetian to stop this, because that's how the prophecy of whatever works. And that means you've got to go to the Isle of the Serpent, where the only Messetians are, and so that's okay. That's all okay. Beyond that, it just throws some stuff in. Okay, well, the Voss, the people of Belnick think it's great, and it's going to be a survival of the fittest thing, so they attack you to stop you leaving. There's then a sea voyage, and there's stuff you might need to do on that, including fight a Kraken. You've then got to sneak onto Serpent Isle. There's then a decent, but badly bloated. It might be like this section of it is, yeah, like 6 pages, 7 pages or something. But the idea that when you're on the island, you're going to have to sneak around, and you've got a potential contact that your contacts know, and he can help you, and he can give you more help the more reasonable you are, obviously. And then there's this guy, he's a ranger actually, who's a true Messetian who worships Messala, is that her name? Or now worships Nesri actually. But you know, the ancient lineage of true religion isn't worshipping the Ornshay the serpent. That's clever, that's good. And there's risks of like how often you might run into a patrol, what makes up the patrols, what will happen if some patrols are defeated, stronger patrols will come. That's all quite clever. But again, just the layout and the writing, too bloated and baggy. It needs condensing. There is a decent situation summary for when you find this guy. Patrols of the enemy are nearby, keeping an eye on him, but not trying to. They don't know where he is, but in the area where he lives, and they will therefore be affected by what happens. He fires a flare arrow. They assume he's attacking them. They get involved. That means they actually run into the PCs. And obviously there's a fudge here, but it's a fudge that's probably acceptable to make that happen. You know, you can see it developing like that. And then he, after a couple of turns of initially attacking the PCs, thinking they're bad guys, joins them. You then have to convince him to come, and you go to the Isle of the Tree, and there's a whole thing where you've got to, you have to fight some giant skeletons, with the ones who have fireballs in their hearts. And there's a test there. That's not a bad test. And then on the way back, an undead Kraken, i.e. the Kraken you may have already killed, attacks you. A bunch of that. Those are interesting scenes and encounters. The problem, I think, with them is... I like this adventure, but I like it because I like the ideas in it, not really how it's laid out or put together. There's a bunch of stuff that needs dumping on a map, really, with that, and you need it to be expanded. You need to be using maps of the Isles of the Serpents. You need to have options. You need to have different paths the players can go down. This is one of the ones that is more railroaded in that sense, and that's a big weakness. The basic idea is good. Also, it says, oh, well, what happens? You come home, there's some stuff, bad things have been happening, you've got to then do the job of reversing the disease, and then you might get all kinds of rewards, and it tells you what kinds of rewards. A non-regent sire might be given a small domain. Locals revere the heroes, and they always have a +2 charisma rating in that area. You get gifts from other kingdoms. One thing is, this is big enough that you've already been told your enemies will ally with you and give you resources as you go on a quest. This is one reason why this is the missed opportunity of the book. This should be not a 20-page adventure that's a bit bloated, but a 32-page adventure that's a lot tighter. So you have this whole world to go around and do stuff to cure this problem. It then, and this is brilliant as well, price of success, price of failure. The price of success is the serpent, the Voss war priests, whoever came up with the disease, they hate you. People in your circle of acquaintances may have died. You are told, make sure to protect any NPCs you really like, which is lame. Tax collections are low. The price of failure is even worse. and characters can die, anyone can die. But that creates this kind of like, this was the big event of the era and now you've got to rebuild. That's great. There is an appendix which is a sort of DM's guide to the different kinds of campaigns. Some of this is, by that I mean that are described in the core box set. And these are okay. There's often some, it's about like player dynamics might work like this. You need to avoid this kind of risk. It gives examples of how to do that. A lot of it though is based on, as the DM, you should fudge and fix things and push players to do stuff to fix those problems. Some of the advice is quite good. It's worth reading if you're going to run a Birthright campaign, but it's mostly, if you're experienced, self-evident, and it has some genuinely bad advice in there as well, by saying stuff like, you know, just tell the players, if they're novice players, just tell them you don't want to do this because it'll be lame. You're like, okay, is that a good reason for players not to do stuff? You know, there needs to be an understanding. It is kind of, but like, what's the feedback mechanism in the real world? By that I mean in the story world. But anyway, I think if you're going to run Birthright, this is not at all a bad resource to have. I think there's a lot of adventures you could adapt and use. There's lots of ideas, lots of models of things, some NPCs who are quite good. I think it is where King of the Giant Downs needs to be more condensed and have more space to get what is a good adventure to be great. Here you've got an average sort of collection with some pretty good ones and some weaker ones and some in the middle. This needs the same stuff just to get to the point of being reliably good. Blood Hungry is interesting. Double dealing double dealing is probably slightly better, but with a silly main event. Gathering of Heroes, very good. Heroes Pride, actually good, but needs to be a different kind of format because it needs to be a side trek that happens over time. Terrible Awakening, decent idea, a very good encounter, otherwise not terribly exciting. Horns of Droney, just a bit dumb. Dwarven Steel, some really good things in it, but again relying on a linear format. Time of Troubles is okay, has some clever ideas in it, but is again that's one of the weaker ones, I think. Poor Relations is interesting as here's a basic mystery and intrigue dealing with an enemy regent, I think, but again could be opened up a bit. Fang of Cretia is actually quite good, is a basically good idea that you could run and I think could be a memorable thing, with that being absolutely top tier. Gift of Azrai could be a great adventure, has a lot of cool stuff in it. Maybe it's something I will write out and expand at some point, but is flawed is basically much too crunched into this quite linear format of interesting, decent things, rather than an actual quest to save the world from a plague. If you have run any of these, then tell me what you think in the comments. And also, if you have run Birthright before, how do you deal with random domain events and the general issue of getting PC regents to go on adventures? I will see you next time.